everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Bright Side of Life. I am your host, of course, Melissa Bright, and today I am talking to America's Joy Magnet, Shari Alyse. Shari is a TEDx and inspirational keynote speaker, #1 best-selling author, and joy guide, and she has built a community of over 150,000 followers and has reached over 10 million people. Shari's deep commitment to others is motivated by her own journey through childhood sexual abuse and other childhood traumas. At 7 years old, Shari found herself having to use her voice on a witness stand to testify against the man who had abused her. She now uses her voice to speak around the world on self-worth, mindset, overcoming obstacles, and how to live a joy-filled life. In 2013, Shari co-founded one of the first online holistic wellness directories and communities. She has been featured on numerous media outlets, including ABC, Fox, NBC, CBS Radio, Huffington Post, Thrive Global, to name, just a few. And she has gone on to executive produce and host multiple online TV and radio shows, and most recently, the talk show Heart to Heart. Over the last 15 years, Shari has reached millions of people with her inspirational videos, speaking engagements, coaching and writings, and of course, her book, Love Yourself Happy, quickly became a #1 release and international bestseller. Shari believes that in the radical acceptance of ourselves, we can truly live a life we love. So that's what we are going to be talking today. And we're also going to be talking about how self-connection can lead to joy. That was a mouthful, but she has a lot of credentials. Welcome to the bright side of life, Shari. How are you doing today?
I'm so well. Thank you, Melissa, for entertaining me with that long bio. I am excited to be here and to chat with you. And at the end of the day, all of the credentials, all that stuff doesn't mean anything if you don't feel good where you are and in your skin and who you are.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And so I always want to share story of like how I connected with people and how I found you. And Shari and I have followed each other on Instagram for quite a while now. And I always saw that she was doing stuff on the news and all this other stuff. And then she just posted about her TEDx talk. And she posted like a 30-second clip. And I was sucked in immediately. And I'm like, I got to go watch this full thing. And I'm telling you, I will link it in the show notes. But her TEDx talk was so amazing and so inspiring. And it was just awesome. And as soon as I saw that clip, I'm like, okay, I got to talk to this woman. And I feel like with her being a joy magnet and this being the bright side of life, like this episode is just going to be amazing.
I love it. Thank you so much for saying that. And it's funny because I noticed you first too, because the yellow and the sunflowers and all that. I was like, oh, it's like my twin out in the world.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, that you just at 7 years old, you did have to testify against somebody who had abused you. And I'm not going to ask you to go into all of that, but I really do want to ask you what happened after that. Who, and maybe before, who was Shari before the incident and who was Shari after? And then we'll kind of go in, who you transformed into even, getting older. But let's just take it back to that time.
It's interesting because whenever you experience any sort of trauma, whether you realize it or not, everything changes. I mean, even as far as your brain, like they show that your brain actually changes after trauma. So I have a lot of memories that are very scattered, a lot that aren't there. But what I do know for sure is that beforehand, I was a lot more free, which is hard for people to believe now because I'm very, out
Right.
there and creative and joyful, as people say. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But there was a sense of safety in my world beforehand. And what changed after that was this feeling of not being safe. And I couldn't put that into words at the time.
Right.
because, I was a child. But what I have come to uncover over the years, and even a week ago, because we never stop healing, and that's been my thing, is that I always want to, and I always want to dig deeper. But this, it's almost like a wall, like this shield around you, and you always do just enough, or just safe enough. You put yourself out there, but there's still, a separation. So who I was before was much freer, much more open. And what happened afterwards is that I started to live a lot more safely, a lot on guard, being hyper vigilant about things. But I was so committed to, I don't know where this came from, to not letting that experience define who I was, that I was not going to be, I convinced myself that I was not going to be the person who didn't trust people. I was not going to be the person who was a victim. And I was going to, and I'm just going to use your brand, I was going to look at the bright side of life, because I knew that things could be different. And I was not going to allow life to do that to me and what had happened.
Right. Yeah.
But that doesn't always go that way.
Right. And you explained it so well, because it's something that I experienced also in a completely different point in my life. But our commonality, if that's even a word, is the trauma. And when I lost my mom at the age of 25, that is when I truly felt like I lost my innocence at that moment. Is everything that I thought the world was, I had experienced pain before, but now it's literally like my worst nightmare, that I didn't even know I had. And it was just like, at that moment, the world was just a little bit less unfair. I didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. And that's just kind of stripped away from us. And as much as we do try to stay resilient in whatever we try to do, sometimes we don't have power over that.
Absolutely. And it's so powerful because you just use the word power. Sorry. I just, because I said powerful.
Right.
Sorry. You'll hear me make little side comments to my own self.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because we don't know. Well, obviously we don't know what we don't know, but what I found is that I totally forgot my train of thought.
I'll give you time. That's why this is a podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So we were talking about me losing innocence, obviously the trauma. What else were we talking about?
That's all right. I'm sure we'll find our way back there, but I'll say something different than just about the fact that everything can start to seem so dim. And no matter how hard we try, like I tried to be happier. I tried to not be a victim. Like I tried, but that stuff follows with us and it carries. And I remember thinking, even though I tried to do all those things, anytime something happened that would be negative, I immediately thought that there was a dark cloud over my head. And so I had attached myself so much to the story of this dark cloud that would follow me, which, just talk about transformation to now then go from dark cloud to America's Joy Magnet. Like it was a journey to get there. And one I think that can only begin or really be successful if we're willing to look at everything truthfully and not try to hide some parts of it to only see this, for out a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now being older, let's say even just in your like early 20s or even 30s, where were you then, mentally? Were you had you done any self-reflection at that point? Did you know who you were? What were you like then?
That was the heart of denying, of suppressing, of numbing my feelings. I mean, really, that was my 20s, especially. I wanted to be a movie star. I wanted to be on television. I majored in theater in college. So I just moved to New York City after college, and I was going to become a star. And that stemmed from two things. Number one, when I talk about multiple traumas, my parents' divorce was a big trauma in my life. because
Mhm.
my sister and I were put in the middle of that. And at that young age, having to choose between parents and just what that looked like. And so what I found though, because my mom was always really upset over my parents' divorce. And what I found is that every time like I did something funny, or if I just like, I watched her mood go from being really upset and really down to a shift. And I remember thinking how much I loved that, being able to change the way that she felt. And so then it became this, which I didn't know, like a game of how much I could entertain her.
Yeah.
So I know that my drive for wanting to entertain and inspire and change feelings came from that young age. And then also, of course, from not having self-worth after what happened to me of being abused, needing external validation
Yep.
through, acting and people being, yay, Shari, you're so good. Like, I love you. And of
Right.
course, again, I didn't know that that's what that was. So my life in my 20s, to go back to that, really consisted of me trying to find external validation through men, through achievements, and really just numbing all of the stuff that wanted to come up that I wasn't dealing with food. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, really from high school on, like after 7, I started putting on weight. And by the time I was in college and in New York, right after graduation, I was 270 pounds, because I was not dealing with my feelings.
Yeah.
So there was no, there was always, it was such an interesting journey. There was always reflection for me because there was always this part of me, this small voice that always knew that there was more, like that this didn't seem right. This
Yeah.
shouldn't be how it is. But I was just lost in that I didn't know how to get off that hamster wheel. I knew that there was something outside, outside of these 4 walls that I was in, but it was
Right.
like, I didn't know where the door was.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my gosh. What you were saying is so similar to like things that I have experienced in terms of, not being aware, but we were also aware of things that we were experiencing. But now I know for both you and I, like we've been on this healing journey. So we can totally pinpoint certain moments when we've had revelations, but other times, like maybe we would still reflect, but we still weren't 100% sure. And you said that you always knew that you wanted more or something else. And I have always felt that way.
yeah.
And you explained it so perfectly of you just didn't know where the door was. Like
Yeah. It's like a
you
roadmap. Like,
yeah,
how do I get there? I know that there's something out there that it's different than where I'm at. I know I don't deserve this. I know that I'm not treating myself well. I know these people aren't treating me well, but I didn't know how to get out of that cycle. I kept making the same choice again and again
yeah,
and again.
yeah. So now that we are there and we talked about the whatever it could be, the bad habits or suppressing feelings, so on and so forth. When was your defining moment? It can either be your defining moment or your breaking point, which a lot of people say.
Mhm.
When did that come for you when things started to change for you?
It's interesting, Melissa, because I'm doing a second TEDx talk, and I'm
Yes.
working, I'm working on the script right now for it. And I'm actually sharing about how it wasn't literally one moment. It was all of the moments leading up to then being so exhausted, like as if I always saw the brick wall in front of me and I knew to slow down, but I kept pressing on that gas pedal anyway. And I finally was at the point, and this was around, I'd say like early 30s. I'm
Okay.
47 now, so you can get an idea of,
Don't
you know,
look at.
thanks.
Yeah.
It's great lighting and Instagram filters. Yeah, it's yeah. So it was early 30s. I was really aware of my exhaustion, that I was at the point where I was so tired of complaining about this life that I was leading and how unfair everything was. And how come I kept choosing the wrong men? And why wasn't anything working out? And I do remember a moment though, because it shifted things for me. And it was one shockingly drunken night because I was partying a lot. And I was with my best friend, and we were just like after hours back at his house. And there was like a few of us, and we were just talking. And I was doing what I always do, which was complain about the men in my life and all this. And he just looked at me and he said, Shari, what kind of woman do you see yourself as? And I just started like listing off this, confident, self-respecting, motive, inspired, whatever. Like I just listed off, and he just
Yeah.
looked at me, and he could have said this to me 2 weeks ago and I wouldn't have heard it. But that day I heard it, and he said, "So be her." And it was like, oh, first of all, I'm an actress. So I was like, okay, I could play this woman. And
Right.
what ended up happening, fast forward, is I started making choices that this woman that I imagined that I wanted to be would make. So when the guy who was disrespectful would call me, I wouldn't text him or call him back. And so I started making these small increment changes and choices. And what I started to notice is that I started feeling better. And when that same pattern would show up with someone, and maybe because we're not perfect, I would fall back, and
Mhm.
I would, that toxic feeling felt like poison in my body
Yeah.
because I wasn't used to it. And so that's really where the shift started happening. So there was the defining moment of being just exhausted. And
Yep.
then my friend saying that, and then me going on a different path. So it was almost as if somebody opened that door in that room for me to
Yeah.
let me see the possibilities of something different.
Yeah. And I love that you say you really paint the picture of these certain moments in your life and like what they looked like, because so often I've been curious. You can hear people's highlight reels of like, what you've done, what you've accomplished, but in between there, you saying what that looked like daily, and then saying, and I would go backwards
Mhm.
because, that's what life seems to do sometimes. And it's not just this, oh,
We're
just this,
human.
yeah, linear journey that just, I
Mhm.
think that's the right word, like just going straight and never. I totally agree with you. So I did want to ask you, because this is something that I have experienced a lot. Even now, I struggle with it. Is since I struggled so much with self worth and self love, when you would do these things to, not text that guy back or not do whatever, did you ever get scared about like stepping into somebody you knew you were? Does that
Stepping into
question
what?
make
Stepping
step
into what?
it's stepping into that person that you knew you wanted to be? Because like stepping into your higher self is scary as hell.
Yeah, every day. It's scary now. It's scary now, up leveling, because we our brains are hardwired to to protect us, to be in, some sort of, to find patterns, and so we want to stay in our comfort zone. And
Yeah.
so anytime we stick our tippy toe out and like look around, it's like, oh, I just want to go back in. And so yeah, up leveling, yes, absolutely scary. And that's why I said, like, I would have never been able to just do it overnight. It started with that small, choice of not texting back. But like you said, or I said, and then I fell back into those patterns at times because it became too scary.
Yeah. Yep.
It was, yeah. But the more and more that I made those choices, and the more and more that I was willing to risk, the more and more like that became the new comfort level.
Exactly, exactly. I love that you pointed out about how our brains literally do not want us to try new things because that's risk and that is not what our
Danger.
brain. Yeah. And I need to remember that. Like I because it is scary. I was talking to my boyfriend yesterday. I said, "I think I am more afraid of success than I am of failure."
Mhm.
Because success requires you to be a whole nother level of yourself. And then you're like, can I be that girl that shows up to that every single day? Um, and I need to know, like, you just reminded me of that, like, literally, our brains are supposed to tell us, don't go that way, don't go that way. And we just have to keep going. And
Yeah, every day it'll do that. No, every day, because I mean that's like biologically, from the past, like we're always on the outlook for it, on the lookout for
yeah,
danger, always. And so if we can just stay in our comfort zone and our cocoon, everything is easier. And it's like, no, we call that out and we make that the new safety, that the new comfort. And that's a lot of the work that I do, that I did with clients, but also really personally, was creating that safety within myself. Because as I
right.
mentioned earlier, with the sexual abuse and everything, I felt very unsafe in the world. And no matter what I do and how I showed up, everything seemed unsafe. And the only way that I was going to be able to change that was if I created that safety within myself. So when things like a pandemic show up or anything else, I'm actually feeling grounded and those heels dug into, dug into the ground and really know I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. And that is so huge because if it's not within yourself and it's outside things, things can really shake, and just like they did during the pandemic and everything else.
And that's the thing with up leveling though. The same
Yeah.
thing, like, it's knowing that you have yourself to fall back on no matter how scary things get, that you're going to be okay in it.
Yeah.
That's how you move to that next level. It's like, I know this is scary as hell, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know I'm going to make sure I'm okay.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So without getting into too much of your actual like TEDx talk, I do want to talk a little bit about not only self connection, but how self connection can lead to joy. But I guess that I just know there are a lot of people out there that might like this might even be over their head a little bit, that they have
Mhm.
no idea what emotional intelligence is. They're like, I know myself. What are you girls talking about? Well, I'm telling you, I thought I knew myself too. And like that all completely changed 2 years ago when I really went on a healing journey. So if you could tell people what is self connection, um, we'll start there. And then I have some follow up questions for that.
Well, let's say this simply. Self connection is really just stillness with yourself. It's sitting in
Yeah.
that space. And by space, I mean with yourself without distractions, really, at the end of the day. It's everything that we deal with all day long, all those emotions, everything that comes up for us that we often then go and distract ourselves with by, as I said in my talk, like binge watching a Netflix series,
Mhm.
shopping, overworking,
Yep.
even working out. People work out too much, like even though it's a healthy habit to work out, but we do that because a lot of times we don't want to sit in that space with ourselves because it hurts too much, because there's pain inside of there. And so we have disconnected from ourselves because for a lot of us, not only is there trauma, which I feel like we've all experienced now with the pandemic, whether we
Mhm.
realize it or not,
Yeah.
but it seems scary to want to sit in that space with ourselves. So self connection is really about sitting in the space with your feelings.
Yeah. And that is such a simple way to put it. And some of the examples you gave are fabulous. It doesn't have to be, the easiest ones would be either, eating your
Mhm.
feelings, drinking your feelings, uh, drugs. Like those are the three major ones. But there are ways, like you just said, the Netflix, just binge watching that. And let me be clear, there is nothing wrong. Like I binge watched Netflix yesterday, but that was because I
Mhm.
needed to relax. I've had a very, very crazy week and I
Mhm.
needed to just decompress. But there is other things, like you said. I used to, what I find myself doing, and my boyfriend literally had to like stop me yesterday. I will just clean the house, like
Yeah.
cleaning and not sitting with yourself. That is also a form of like not dealing with things. So if you're
Yeah.
just busy and you might have experienced trauma either relatively like recent or even years ago, that's what she is talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say behaviors in and of themselves are not toxic. It's the way that you use them. Like, so if you're doing it to, just like drinking, like for somebody, drinking a certain amount would not be toxic behaviors for them, but for somebody else, because the why they're choosing it would be. So,
Yep.
and only we know,
Yeah.
like only we know how that affects us and why we're avoiding. I mean, even just like the mindless scrolling, for like I said, food was always my outlet. That's where I went. And I can
Yeah.
still, even now, I know when I'm having a stressful or whatever day, because I'm standing in front of the fridge looking at it, not hungry. And I see that and I go, okay, Shari, what's going on?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's about the connection is about sitting with your feelings. Simple
Yeah.
as that. Yeah.
And I love it. And I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. So now, Shari, we know what self connection is. What does sitting in your feelings look like? And I just want to know these examples because people, I'm sure, are like, do you literally just mean sitting there and just like thinking? And like, what does that mean? So can you give us examples of how can we connect with ourselves?
I mean, there's so many different multitude of ways. I mean, some people do it through meditation. Some people do it through dancing. Some people do it through yoga. I do it through taking walks with myself out in nature because I know the difference between when I'm sitting here with my phone mindlessly scrolling and when I'm very present taking a walk and my everything lowers, like my stress levels, my anxiety, and I feel that connection. Sitting with your feelings. And I said, it looks like just like even going for a walk without your phone, right?
Yeah.
Like just being fully present. It doesn't mean like sitting, on your couch Indian style going all, which for some it could be, like totally could be, but it's being fully present with yourself. And especially like I have two things that I do every single day. And one is I self hug.
Yes.
I do that every single day, twice a day. And the other is as soon as I wake up, I place my hands on my heart and I say thank you. But I also ask myself how I'm feeling because it's really easy to go into our day and start with the to-do list and everything and not really be present with what we're bringing into the day. And so that connection of like, hey, how are you feeling? And it's okay to feel sad, right? Like yesterday I was taking a walk and I felt a little bit of heaviness. And instead of going, nope, things are good, you got to, I
Right.
actually said, what are you sad about? Like not making ourselves wrong for the way that we feel.
Right.
So important to do that. And that's for me, like sitting with your feelings. That's what sitting with yourself is: inquiring, asking, offering compassion, extending grace to yourself with all that you feel.
Yeah. One of my biggest ways that I realized that there was something up with me, I don't want to say wrong because I'm not wrong, but in my relationship with my boyfriend, I am one that reacts very quickly because I am scared of disappointment and disappointing anybody.
Mhm.
And so my reaction is usually anger very, very quickly. Um, and for a long time, he has pointed this out. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't understand that's how my response is because that's not how he operates. Um, and it took a lot of him telling me these things and me finally listening and accepting he might have there's something to this because that is not a normal reaction. Being angry very quickly is not, I don't want to say it's not okay, but it's not okay, especially when you're treating somebody that you love, which that means there's something going on that I have not addressed yet, you
Mhm.
know? And I just want to say that because that's one of the ways that I learned so much about myself is that I hadn't addressed my trauma from my dad treating me like crap when I was little to now fear of disappointment that it has now seeped into my relationship
Yeah,
freaking 30 years late, however, 20 years later. Um, and so that self connection, um,
absolutely.
being mindful of even that is because that's what got me to my stuff now and really trying to be aware and mindful of the way that I treat other people is I got to be connected with myself first.
Yes, absolutely. And our relationships are our greatest reflections. And they're usually, I mean, every day, like as you talked about being, angry and short, like I was always super defensive because I
Yeah.
thought somebody was telling me that I was wrong. And I was made to feel wrong on that witness stand at 7 years old. And so my natural reaction, as soon as someone says something, and they're like, I wasn't even saying that, Sherry, or like, why not? Like, and
Yeah.
after a while, that's part of, that transformation was really looking. This is again part of my second TEDx talk was the willingness for us to, though, be wrong, like to not be so attached to what we think and what we believe.
Yep.
Because all of that, is not always right. And so the fact that you were able to reflect, that's what self-connection is. It's self-reflection. It's looking at that. It's saying, maybe if a lot of people are saying this about me, or maybe if this doesn't, maybe they have a point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
100%. Okay, so we've talked about what it is. We've talked about how we can self connect. Now, how can self connection lead to joy is going to be my question. But something else that you define in your TEDx talk is that there is a difference between joy and happiness. So should we define what joy and happiness is first before we go into that question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, because it's I mean, they're so intertwined and people use them interchangeably, and I don't think that they're the same.
Right.
For me, in my experience, and even some research that they've done, and even the fact that there's not a lot of research on joy because it's hard to research things that are inside of people as opposed to on the outside. So, simply put, happiness is often dependent on external things, right? So, this is so obvious when someone says, "Are you happy, Melissa?" And then we have to stop and think about it and go, "Am I happy?" Because then we start to think about, well, I'm happy in my relationship, but I'm not happy in my job. I'm happy with my health, but I'm not happy, like there's
Yeah.
all of these things, and happiness always comes from that aspect. Joy, on the other hand, we create joy. Joy are moments that are within ourselves. Joy, from a research base, is this feeling of reconnection or connection to something important. And so joy basically is internal, happiness is external, which is why, like, we feel like someone can define and go, does this bring you joy? And you just say yes or no.
Right.
It's like, it's so clear cut, but it always comes from within. And even in my talk, I said, happiness found outside of you, joy is felt by leaning in.
Yes. I
So
love
let's
that.
start with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a huge aha moment for me because the whole world I feel like is in terms of happy, like when will I be happy? What makes me happy? Um just all of these things, and it's just very interesting to
I'll be
put
happy
those.
when.
Yeah. Oh, and I have been there
Mhm.
many, many times. Like
Most of us have.
even with my podcast, like that journey is, not I try to celebrate the small moments and the small victories. And like finally when I'm like, Jay Shetty status, like I want to enjoy all the moments in between because I might not be Jay Shetty status for like 8 years. Okay. Am I just gonna be miserable for 8 years? And then finally I'm like, oh cool, I'm like number one mental health podcast. That was fun. Okay, next. Like, no, I want to enjoy all the in between.
Yeah. There's always another bar with happiness. There's always, you get there and it's like, oh, wait, that didn't work. That's what I thought about my weight. Once I had lost all this weight, because I was like, you know what? If I lose weight and I'm skinny, I'm finally going to be happy because then I'm going to take better care of myself. I'm going to respect myself more. And it was like, no, I lost all this weight and I still had the same challenges that I had.
Yeah.
I just recently saw this powerful coach that I know, a friend, and she went from not having money to now lots of money. And she coaches women on how to open, abundance and everything. And she just recently just put out a post saying that she is basically not happy. That she thought that having all this abundance and everything would, but then she found herself caught up in another lifestyle of that and
Right.
having like no freedom and all that. So there's exactly what you said. Happiness is always out there. It's always something we're chasing. And we always think that it's going to bring us some sort of, oh, the pearly gates open in our lives. And I
Yep.
remember that actually really quickly, Melissa, like I had this clear moment of that years ago. I was living in West Hollywood when I was pursuing acting at the time. And I had this great social media following. And I remember one day laying in my bed and scrolling through my phone, and I had posted something and people were leaving all of these beautiful comments. And they were like,
Mhm.
you're the best, Shari. You're so inspirational. You're this, you're that, like amazing things, right? And as I was scrolling, I remember just sitting there reading these just words at me. And I felt so numb inside. And up
Yeah.
until that point, I had always wanted to have all of those accolades, right? I thought that that was ultimately what I wanted. And in that moment, I was so sad. And in that moment, I felt so free because it
Yeah.
meant that if the stuff inside the phone, the things that I thought would make me happy aren't, then it was actually inside of me. Then I had to find out what it was within me that, you know, what
I
that I was looking for that would be fulfilling and contentment. And that's what joy is.
I love that. I feel like I just had this aha moment, and I've talked about this on my podcast before. Some of my biggest revelations have came about 2 hours before waking up, and I'm not a scientist, but I know that there's research or something like your brain waves slow down whenever you're sleeping. And I don't know. Somebody else has talked about it on my
Really
podcast, but
neuroscience-y.
yeah, yeah. But some of my biggest, it's like I'm talking to myself and I will get these answers. And it's kind of like you, me building a social media presence is something that I have to do for my podcast. And of course, receiving accolades is great. What came to me this morning is none of this is going to matter if other people aren't truly getting help that I want them to get out of what I'm putting out on social media. I don't want you to follow me just and then me being like, oh, cool, I just got another follow. I want you to follow me because I want you to get something out of the messages that I'm trying to tell you for you. And
Absolutely.
that came to me this morning, and I'm like, okay, so I like it when revelations come to us.
I love those moments, and they do for me too. And I've got a million notes in my phone from 3 o'clock in the morning where I'm just like, it's like everything's being downloaded to me. So I'm just like typing away, go, 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 go. And here's the
Yes.
beautiful thing. Your next revelation will be, it also doesn't matter. I'm just telling you what your revelation is, which
Yeah.
may not be yours. It was mine because I had that same one. But the
Yeah.
next one was literally, and that doesn't matter either. Not that people don't matter in what you're doing, but if at the end of the day, you can't look at yourself in the mirror and
Yeah.
love who you see back without the people in the world changing because of the work that you're doing. This morning I took my walk. I was crying because I cry often. I always like I sit with my inner child a lot, like on my nature
Yeah.
walks and stuff. And I cried because I was like, none of this matters. Like I just had this conversation, like none of everything that matter. I love you. I was saying that to myself, and I'm so proud of who I am and the work that I do in the world, not in the external sense, but in showing up as myself and being kind to myself and being kind to others. Those are all the things that ultimately at the end of the day really matter.
Yes. That's huge. That's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And
And that
that's
doesn't have to be a revelation. I was just saying that because I was like, it's where I'm at now. So it's like top of mind.
right. But it is true because I am very also a firm believer in like practicing what I preach, like when I tell people and encourage them to share their story, I would never say that if I had not already done that, like
Right.
publicly on my podcast, on my social media, and so I just want to live the words that I'm saying. And most of the time on social media, the stuff that I do put out, it's those small voices that I just put out on social media that I heard first and now I need to tell somebody else about it. Um so you're right, that will be the revelation that that comes to me. I have
I
no
didn't mean
doubt.
to tell you your own journey, but
No, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Okay. So since we did answer that question, now can you explain, and I know you kind of touched on it, really how self connection can ultimately lead to joy?
so joy for me and in what I've learned and what I've shared with others and have watched their journey is really about the full acceptance of ourselves, the full
Yeah.
connection and the full acceptance of ourselves. And so for me, it's about redefining joy, that it's not about moments, it's not about things, it's not even about the childbirth or the field of sunflowers, although those create moments of joy.
Right.
The most joy that I have ever felt in my life is every single time I show up as myself. Every single time I honor myself and my feelings. Every single time that I allow my creative self that's there to flow. Every time that I speak my mind and I speak my truth. Every time that I am fully me, aligned in my body. That's joy. And we only know that when we are connected to ourselves, when we have those moments of check in, when we are aware, when we practice self compassion. So that's why I say joy is always within us. It's allowing ourselves to be fully ourselves. And the more and more of us that show up every single day in that space, the more and more joy we feel.
Yeah. This was another like mind-blowing moment when I watched your TEDx. I was like, literally, that is when I started getting happy. Not like that when I decided to accept myself for all of my flaws, for things that I was shameful for, which was basically back in 2020. I finally I released all of that. There were so many things I was shameful for, which I mentioned a little bit on my post in the boot camp thing. I was shameful that I didn't finish college. I was shameful that I didn't own a house. I was shameful. I could give a hell less about being married. I am not shameful for that because I haven't found the person I now have, but we're not in a rush. So I
Mhm.
have, but just so many things that society said you had to be by a certain time and a certain age that I didn't. And I didn't because I lost my number one supporter as a very young woman and
Mhm.
I lost myself. So, well, people might say, well, Melissa, that's an excuse. You could have finished college. You could maybe, but maybe that just wasn't my path. And
Mhm.
this was how it was supposed to be. But and that's why I say vulnerability is superpower, because when you finally accept your flaws and everything, nobody else in the world can use that against you because you already know and you're working on it.
being
Seriously.
being fully human. Like if we were all meant to be these superpower super beings, I don't believe, and this is probably going to sound like woo woo and crazy, but I don't believe we would have came into this being, into this
Yep.
form. If that's the way we were supposed to be, we all would just stayed in like heaven or wherever it is that you believe, you know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah.
we're here to fully experience being human, which means feeling all of our emotions. And so not punishing ourselves because of our sadness, not punishing ourselves, when we're jealous or we feel that anger, we're quick to react, whatever that looks like. So the more and more that we accept and are okay with our humanness,
Yeah.
again, back to the more and more we just feel joy because we're living our truth. There is nothing more beautiful and joyful than living your truth. That's it.
Yep. Yep.
And that's freedom.
Absolutely.
I mean, all of that. Those are all like ingredients to me of joy.
Yeah. I feel the same way. And if you have not if you're listening to this and you have not done any kind of self connection or anything or any reflecting, yeah, it's gonna be uncomfortable. I
Mhm.
promise you, and I swear it's gonna be uncomfortable. But it's something that is so worth it. It's so worth getting to know yourself. And Sherry has such a beautiful story of going to Tuscany and finding herself, and it's just amazing. And it's not for one person and not the other. Everybody can have self connection. And I'm telling you, when you sit with yourself, and this is when people say people have asked, do you really hear voices? You don't, well, you might hear voices, but things just come to you, and they come to you just either as a thought or something. That is your subconscious, your higher self, your whoever telling you these things. Sherry, do you want to share that story about Tuscany and the church? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, and what's interesting is I didn't have time in the TED talk to go into what actually happened before, 5 years before that, when I first came face to face with my 7-year-old self. Um,
I just
that
got
was,
goosebumps.
yeah, that was the catalyst for Italy, actually, and in that moment. And I don't know how much time we have,
If you
but
want to, you can.
I'd love to share that because that was
Please.
the start. So I was this, God, no, I was like, what, 10 years ago? I don't even remember, 10, whatever. It was like at least a decade ago.
Mhm.
I was waiting tables, probably more than that now. And I was getting ready to go to work and I was taking a shower. And in my shower, I found myself in the corner of my shower, just like sobbing, just like on the floor in fetal position. And it was the first time, because over the years, I obviously thought about the abuse, but I had never really connected to it, like
Mhm.
in body, everything. And in that moment, that day, it all came back to me. And I had to get to work. So I was driving to work and I remember just like guttural sounds, like tears flowing from me. And I just pulled over to the side of the road and I called my manager at the time. And I was like telling her like memories and abuse and all this. And she said, Sherry, just go, like, take time, like whatever you need, just take the
Yeah.
time that you need. And it was one of those like literal signs, because I got home back to my apartment and I didn't know what to do. I just knew for me that I always needed to get in my car and drive. Like I always needed to go somewhere else outside of my four walls.
Yep.
And I turned my computer on to try to figure out what I was going to do next. And there was this pop up for Sedona. And I'd never been, have you ever been to Sedona, Arizona?
No, I want to.
Okay. Okay. So I didn't know anything about Sedona except the fact that everyone said it was the most spiritual place in the US. And so I was like, I talk about this in one of my talks though, but I was like, I don't know if this is like spiritual or mystical, but I just needed somebody to do like this exorcism of these feelings that I had out of me. And so the next thing I knew, I was in Sedona, like it's an 8-hour drive. And I'll fast forward this part. I spent a few days there. Like there's like these vortexes that are supposed to have like they're feminine, masculine, and have all these different healing powers. Well, there's nothing like expectations. I went there like all this stuff is going to happen, and nothing really happened memorable those 2 days. So on my drive out, I was going past this last vortex that I did not want to go to because there was nothing sexy sounding about the airport vortex. But I thought it is so beautiful here. So I just want to take in the view. Yeah. And so I parked and I walked up to the top of the vortex and I was taking in the vista. And then I turned around to go back to my car. And this is going to sound crazy to a lot of people. But when I turned around, there was my 7-year-old self just leaning up against the rocks in my like camp shorts that I had used to wear and feathered hair. And just, she had her arms, I had my arms wrapped around her knees, and she looked up at me and she literally said, "It took you long enough." And we sat, like I always tell people, like we sat for like what seemed like hours and talked, but it was probably just a couple of minutes, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. And I told her that I loved her. I told her that I just couldn't keep going protecting her anymore, that I was keeping her at the safe distance within, like with my weight and everything, you know, trying to protect her so no one could hurt her, and that I loved her, and I said goodbye to her. Yeah. And I went back to my car and I drove back to LA, and everything seemed like a little bit lighter, but there was still something wrong and missing. So now fast forward 5 years to Italy, to Tuscany, and I'm brokenhearted. My fiance at the time, well, no, he's my boyfriend at the time, who's now my fiance, spoiler alert. We had broken up. And I went off to Italy too, because it was like, well, what else am I going to do? He was supposed to move here with me, and I didn't know what else to do. And so I always had this dream of going there. And over that summer, I found myself, like I disconnected from everything and everyone. And I spent a lot of time with myself. That was true self-connection, Melissa. Like that was sitting with every feeling that I had ever had, every heartbreak, every disappointment, everything. And one of my last days there in Italy, I was at my favorite church, which was called San Miniato al Monte. And I would always go early in the morning because it was super quiet and it was beautiful. And it was just, you can watch my TED Talk to get all the details, but I did it. But basically, I was just there with my eyes closed, like I always was, and just feeling the church. And I heard the words like as an audible voice and also within. So that just simply said, you weren't supposed to leave her. You were supposed to love her. And that for me was the moment on the vortex in Sedona, that I wasn't supposed to walk away from her that day there or on the witness stand, because at 7 years old, I felt like I disconnected from her fully because it was too painful to stay in that space with her. Mm-hmm. And that began the real journey back to myself, because once I heard those words, that was literally, you're supposed to love her. I started showing up every day after that saying, how can I love you? How can I love you today? What do you need from me? And that's where the hug started coming, because I heard the voice that just said, I just wanted a hug growing up. And so I heard, so give her a hug. And I did. And then every day after that.
Oh my gosh. I literally just got like so many goosebumps from that story. But that this is stuff that will happen to you. Like when you do self-connection, these things will come to you. And I'm telling you, listen to them, because that is yourself telling you these things. And so I want to share a story with you that I've shared on my podcast. I had a reverse experience. I was doing Jay Shetty in last January was doing like 21 days of meditation. He was going live on his Instagram. And one of the days was, he asked us to go back to a time when we were our younger selves. And I don't know what age he said, and I probably didn't even pick the right age. I just thought of who I was as a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and I want you to tell them whatever, whatever, whatever. And then I was fine. I was fine. Then he switched it, and he wanted the younger self to tell the older person. And I lost it. Because for me, even though I had some trauma in my childhood with my dad not treating us right, my biggest trauma came as an adult. That's when I really felt the world was
Mm-hmm.
not in my favor. And so my younger self telling my older self, it's okay to be free. It's okay to act silly. You don't have to take life so seriously. Like, I am sobbing while Jay Shetty's still doing this meditation.
Uh,
And that was so powerful for me because I felt after losing my mom, I did lose a lot of my innocence and silliness. And I had to take life a little bit more seriously because when is something else bad going to happen? Um, it's just crazy. Like, but it is so important also, like, for your inner child and taking care of our inner child.
Yeah, no, the last keynote that I gave, I literally said, we always hear, like, what would you say to your younger self? And I talked about how I wouldn't say anything to her. I would let her speak to me.
Yeah.
I would tell
Yep.
her, I'd let her tell me what she needs and how, like I just said before, how I can love her, how I can sit with her, because most of us are in this performatory, I don't know if that's a word, but like I just made that up, but pretend it's real.
Love it. I love it.
But like trying to, like, get acceptance and people pleasing, so many of us, because we're taught that as young kids, like by our parents, if you do this, do that, you're a good girl, you're a good boy. And so we learn that. And so we
Yeah.
often betray our own voices in order to receive that love from outside of ourselves. So actually listening to our inner child and seeing what they want and what they need and not what everybody else does is such powerful work.
Yeah. And if you're looking for a place to start to do self-connection, if you want to even start there in terms of, like, what would you tell your inner child? I mean, so many of us have went through something when we were younger, or, you know, society has shaped us to tell us who we're supposed to be, but, like, think back of when you were a little kid and what you enjoyed, and what would she tell you now? I think that would be a great exercise for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah, it's all just about like the questioning and the willingness to sit with yourself, the willingness to just inquire, the willingness to, when you're in pain, to not run from it, to just sit with it and say, "Hey, I love you. You okay? What do you need?" Like that willingness, that's again what self-connection is. And there's not a blueprint of how to do it. It's just not running from any of it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
And then
That's
on the days that
that's
you
it.
do, being okay with yourself and offering yourself compassion and literally saying, like, you could say, I know that day was scary for you. I know you
Yeah.
didn't want to deal with it. It's okay. I got you now. It's
Yeah.
that's how I talk to myself.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh, it's so powerful. So powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So I know we only have about 10 or 15 minutes left, but I do want to ask you, you have a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that we mention. First of all, you have a book. So would love, love, love if you could please share your book, what it's called and what it is about.
So the book, thank you. The book is Love Yourself Happy, A Journey Back to You. And it really was written a lot in Italy. And I share in detail the stories that I shared about Tuscany and about Sedona and about my abuse. So it's really, I call it a road trip back to ourselves. Because like I said, getting in the car for me and getting on the open road is so healing for me. And so the book is just filled with what I call detours, rest stops, and fuel ups. Just sharing, the personal journey that I took, but with lessons, which are our fuel ups, and things like a rest stop called Stop Looking on the Bright Side. I just brought that one up, or like, which is always look on the bright side, but also be willing to look underneath, and like toxic positivity,
Yeah.
just the importance of that. But all different chapters. And it really just shares the journey of how we're always everything we talked about, looking for happiness on the outside to ultimately come back to ourselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just so you guys know, if you go to her, well, in the show notes, I will drop all of her information. But also, if you go to my website, you go to her individual episode page, all of her information is also there, from where you can find the book, website, so on and so forth. And as we have said, Shari also clearly is an amazing, amazing public speaker.
Thank you.
She would not
We're gonna
be
talk your ear off today.
um but yeah, if any of you, she is open to doing any kind of public speaking or anything. So if her story resonated with you at all, please also connect with her. Shari, just so I can say it audibly, not so they have to go to show notes also, but where can they connect with you?
So they can go to my website, which has all of my social links. So it's sharialyse.com. I have my speaker page on there, my author page, all of that. And I'm super active on Facebook and on Instagram. You can just look me up by my name and you will find me. And those are the best ways to connect.
Yes. And last name is Alyse. So
Yes.
just no confusion. Okay.
And Shari.
Shari. Do you have any? Okay, I have one more question for you, but before that, do you have anything that we have left out that we didn't cover that you would like to cover, that you would like to share? And if so, feel free.
I mean, I think I know you did a really great job, and like really just covering everything. I think anything that I would share right now would be just a repeat of stuff. So if I was just to leave anybody with anything, is just to be kind to yourself, gentle with yourself, and patient with yourself. That there is no rush on anything, and that you're doing the best you can.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
We all need to tell ourselves that daily.
Yeah.
Daily, for
Yeah,
sure.
and that we're doing a great job. I just remember being with a coach once, and she just said that to me. She said, "You're doing great, Shari." And I broke down and cried. And I was like, why did that just affect me so much? And it's because of all the pressure, especially this day and age with social media and comparison and like where we think we have to be, like that it's never enough, right? And so when she said you're doing a great job, it was like my whole body exhaled. So I think everyone needs to hear that too, that you're doing a great job.
Yeah. Yesterday, I struggled yesterday. I told myself that Sunday, I'm doing this TV boot camp. I've been doing it for like the last 6 days on top of all my other stuff. And I told myself yesterday was my decompress, relax. And I started getting really, really anxious. I was like, Melissa, you got to go do something. You got to clean the house. You got to do this. And finally, I opened up to my boyfriend and I said, I'm kind of struggling today. I feel like there's the dishes need to be done, the laundry needs to be done, but I can't. I need to just stop and decompress. And he's like, I will not let you go do the laundry. I will not let you clean the dishes. And like, I kind of needed that because I wasn't going to stop myself. And I a lot of times won't allow myself to relax because there's always this thing I could be doing.
That's
and
disconnection.
Yeah, and that's
keep busy because when you stop in that slowness, all the stuff comes up.
And this is me coming off a high of such an amazing week. But then I felt like I had to keep going. Melissa, you can't decompress. Melissa, keep going. You got to do this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. So I'm telling you, the highs and lows will come hit you. Yeah, seriously. Okay. So I ask all of my guests this in your own words. What does the bright side of life mean to you?
The bright side of life means to me knowing that everything is always going to be okay, no matter what.
Yeah.
Like that's it, having that confidence, that safety, that sense of trust in myself and in life, that it's always going to be okay.
Yeah. And it's, I know some people that if they're listening to this and maybe they're going through stuff and they say, how can she say that? And it's just when you are so safe and you love yourself so much, you can fall back on yourself when things are not okay.
Yes.
And I think that's what Shari is exactly trying to say. You can lean on yourself. Yeah.
It's exactly what I'm trying to say. Because I put sense of safety in the world and all outside of me, and that will never bring that to you. But when you can rely on yourself, that no matter what is happening, you will be okay, then you can confidently say that. And
Yep.
you can take more risks in life.
Exactly. Exactly. Shari, it was so great to finally talk to you face to face. We have been messaging so much over this past week and a half. Thank you so much for everything that you have not only done for me, but everything you are doing in the world. You are amazing. I greatly appreciate you coming on here to share your story.
Thank you so much for letting me share it, really, and for you and the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you. Thank